I did not go to the sealed chamber to hope. I went because the stone beneath it was the coldest floor in Valethorn Hold, and cold, in the hour before dawn, had a way of making the mind exact. I had governed this kingdom for 10 years without a Luna, without a confirmed bloodline, without the seal's light, and I had learned to be exact about what I could not change. The seal of Valethorn hung on its plinth above the center of the vault, a disk of black iron the size of a cartwheel, etched in the old script, fitted with a shallow depression at its heart where a palm could rest. It had been dark since before my grandfather's grandfather drew breath. 400 years of silence. The scholars argued over whether the bloodline had simply ended or whether it slept somewhere, unknown to itself, waiting. I had stopped arguing. Argument required a kind of belief I had long since set down. What I could not set down was the trial. My council had arranged it for tomorrow's second bell, 47 women of Valethorn Hold and the neighboring territories, each of whom had submitted a lineage claim or been nominated by their pack elders, each of whom would press her palm to the iron and feel nothing. I knew what nothing felt like. I had watched it 43 times in the last trial, 4 years ago. 43 palms, and the seal had remained as cold and mute as the stone around it. My steward, Bren, found me there before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge. My lord, he stood at the vault's entrance, holding his ledger against his chest the way he always did when he had something to tell me that he thought I would find inconvenient. The trial roster is complete. 47 participants. I've confirmed each name with the archive. Good, I didn't turn from the seal. Is there something else? A pause. There is one irregularity. Now I looked at him. The bondless ward, the one assigned to the archive vaults in early spring, Saren, she was not placed on the trial list. He opened the ledger to a particular page, though I was too far away to read it. She was admitted to the hold 3 months ago as an unclaimed ward. No pack bond, no lineage document. The council's intake officer recorded her as a woman of no verified origin and assigned her to the vaults because the archive needed a sorting hand. She was not nominated by any elder, and because she submitted no lineage claim, she was not included. I waited. The archive head brought it to my attention this evening, Bren continued, with the careful evenness of a man who knows he is delivering information past its useful hour. She is, technically, a resident of the hold. The trial charter specifies any woman of Valethorn Hold of eligible age. Whether she qualifies as a participant is a question I did not feel I could resolve without bringing it to you. I turned back to the seal. Its surface was flat and cold and offered me nothing. Add her name, I said. My lord, she has no lineage document. The council will object. The trial charter says any woman of the hold. She is a woman of the hold. Add her name. Bren wrote something in his ledger. At what position in the order? Last, I said, not because it mattered, but because it was the simplest answer. She was added last. She goes last. He left, and I stayed in the vault until the cold had done its work on my mind, and the sky outside had turned the specific gray of a Valethorn morning. Not dark, not light, the color of a stone that has not yet decided what it will be. I did not hope, but I stayed a while longer anyway, looking at the iron, the way you look at a door you have not tried in a long time. The trial hall was the vault itself. There was nowhere else in Valethorn Hold large enough and solemn enough to hold the weight of the thing we were doing. My council arranged themselves along the northern wall, 7 men and 2 women, each of them carrying a decade's worth of political anxiety about the Northern Alliance, about the succession question, about what happened to a kingdom whose ancient seal confirmed nothing. They arranged themselves the way anxious people always do, very precisely, as if the precision might protect them. I took the dais at the vault's far end. From there, I could see the seal's plinth and the low stone step that brought each participant's palm level with the iron center depression. I could see the vault's entrance, where the participants waited in order. I could see my counsel's faces, which I had learned over 10 years to read the way a man reads weather. The particular gray of their expressions today told me they expected nothing, and had already begun, in their private minds, to draft the arrangements that would follow failure. They were not wrong to draft them. I had been doing it myself. The first woman came forward at second bell. She was the daughter of the Aldenmore Pack elder, 26 years old, composed, dark-haired, with the precise posture of someone who had been told since childhood that she might be the one. She pressed her palm to the seal. The iron sat cold and silent. She stepped back. Her composed expression did not change, but something in her shoulders came down slightly, and I thought she had hoped after all. The second woman, the third. The trial had a rhythm to it that was almost kind, the approach, the pause, the step back, and then the next name called. By the seventh I had stopped watching each face and let my eyes rest on the seal itself, the way you watch a river when you are waiting for something to surface. Nothing surfaced. By the 20th I had begun, quietly and without drama, to think about the Northern Alliance. The Keldrath Pack would want terms. The Venmore contingent would want different terms. Bridging them without a confirmed Luna bloodline was possible but costly. It would require concessions that would take years to recoup, and it would announce to every Northern Pack that Veilthorn's ancient claim to the Luna lineage was finished. That was a kind of weakness that had consequences, not immediate and spectacular consequences, but the slow, compounding kind that took hold over generations. I had no heir, I had no mate, I had a cold seal and 47 names. By the 35th I had drafted, internally, the opening paragraph of the speech I would give my counsel when the last name had been called, and the seal had remained dark. By the 40th I was thinking about the archive vaults, about the ward who had been sorting documents there for 3 months and had not, apparently, made enough of an impression on anyone to have her name included in the trial roster until Bren caught the omission the night before. A woman of no verified origin, no lineage document. I did not know what she looked like. I did not know why I was thinking about her. The 46th woman stepped back from the seal. Her name was Merritt, from the Thornville contingent 31, recommended by 3 elders, and she had pressed her palm to the iron with a confidence that I had found, privately, a little exhausting. The iron had not been interested in her confidence. 46 palms, the seal was cold. My counsel's faces had completed their journey from anxiety into the particular blankness of people who have stopped expecting a result and begun waiting for it to be officially over. Bren stepped to the side of the vault. "The 47th participant," he said, and something in his voice was careful in a way I had not heard all morning, not ceremony, not gravity, but the careful evenness of a man who is uncertain what is about to happen. "Saren of Veilthorn Hold." She came in from the vault's side entrance, which was not the ceremonial entrance, but the plain door that the archive staff used. She had clearly come directly from the vaults. There was a smudge of something on her left forearm that looked like ink or old binding dust, and her gray dress was the practical kind that the archive workers wore, not dressed for anything. She was carrying a cloth she had been using to clean her hands and had not quite finished with. She tucked it into a pocket when she entered and seemed to realize, in the same motion, that she was in a room full of people who had been waiting for something. She stopped just inside the door and looked at the room. Not at me, not at the council, not at the seal. She looked at the room the way a person looks at a thing they were not expecting to find. Then she looked at the seal. She had the quality, and I noticed it before I had words for it, of someone who had learned to make themselves easy to overlook. Not because she was without presence, but because her presence was quiet in a way that did not demand attention. She moved without announcement. She stood without performing the act of standing. When she finally looked at me briefly, the way you look at the person in the room with the most authority before you speak, there was no ceremony in it. Just an assessment, honest and unassuming. "I'm sorry," she said to the room generally, with the measured composure of someone who is confused but will not show it as distress. "I was told to come. I wasn't sure this was the right door." "It was the right door," Bren said. "Will you approach the seal, please?" She looked at the seal again. I watched her look at it. Something in me had gone very quiet, in the way that happens sometimes before a storm, not dread, but a complete and involuntary stillness, as if my body had decided something my mind had not yet caught up to. She crossed the vault without ceremony. She did not walk like a woman who believed she was about to do anything significant. She walked like a woman crossing a room to look at a piece of iron she had been asked to touch, and who was not sure why she had been asked, but who was not the kind of person to refuse a reasonable request. She stepped onto the low stone step. She looked at the seal for a moment, not with reverence, but with the specific attentiveness of someone who notices things. And then she pressed her palm to the iron's center depression, flat and open, the way you press your hand to a window to feel whether the glass is cold. The seal screamed. There is no other word for it. The sound was not audible. It was not a sound at all. It was a vibration that began in the iron and traveled through the stone floor and up through the soles of my boots and into my chest, and in the same instant the vault flooded with silver light. The old script carved into the seal's face ignited line by line, from the outer edge inward, each mark burning to silver white as the light reached it, and the whole disk pulsed, once, twice, and then held, steady and blazing, the way a sun holds its light, full and permanent and without apology. Saren did not pull her hand back. She looked at it, her palm against the iron, the silver light pouring from the point where her skin touched the old script, with an expression I did not have a category for. Not awe, not triumph. Something quieter and more private, as if the seal had told her something she had always half known and not had words for until now. And then, in the moment I was watching her face and trying to name what was in it, something burned on my left wrist. I looked down. The Luna mark, the old mark that had not appeared on any Alpha King of Veilthorn in 400 years, two interlocking crescents, silver pale, traced in light against my skin, as if the seal had pressed it there from across the vault. I had read descriptions of it in the archive texts. I had looked at illustrations of it in documents so old they crumbled at the edges. I knew what it was before the burning had finished. I looked across the vault at Saren. She was looking at her own wrist. The same mark. Her left wrist, glowing in the seal's light, the two crescents burning against her skin with a steadiness that was nothing like the flickering of the other women's hands against the cold iron. Not a trick, not a question. A statement made by 400 years of accumulated silence that this was the answer it had been holding. My council had gone entirely still. 7 experienced political minds and 2 of the most composed women I knew, and all 9 of them had been reduced to the silence of people who have just watched something they had stopped believing in walk through a side door. Saren looked up from her wrist. She looked across the vault at me. And I was already moving. I had not decided to step off the dais. I became aware that I had done it somewhere around the midpoint of the vault, when the stone floor was beneath my boots, and the seal's light was making the whole chamber luminous and still, and Saren was still standing on the low step with her palm against the iron and her eyes on my face. I stopped at the foot of the step. This close, the seal's light fell between us the way moonlight falls through a gap in clouds, partial, concentrated, specific. Her eyes were the color of deep water, and they were calm in a way I had not expected. She had just watched a 400-year-old piece of iron ignite at her touch. She had just watched a mark burn onto her wrist that she could not have known to expect. She had walked into this vault 20 minutes ago without knowing why she had been summoned, in her archive dress with binding dust on her arm, and she was calm. Not the composure of performance. The real thing, the stillness of someone who has learned to receive whatever comes without flinching, because flinching had never changed anything. "Saren," I said. She looked at me. "Are you all right?" It was not perhaps the most sovereign thing I had ever said, but it was the thing that was true. She considered the question with the seriousness she seemed to give most things. Then she said, "I think so. My hand is very warm." Behind me, I heard my counsel begin to move, the small adjustments of people coming out of shock and into action, someone's boot heel on stone. The soft, deliberate sound of the council elder Marith lowering himself to one knee. I did not look back. "You were in the archive vaults," I said. "Yes." She looked slightly past me at the council and then back at my face. The composure did not waver, but something in her gaze grew a little more careful. "I've been sorting the Western land records. The previous archivist left them in no particular order. I was going to have them done by autumn." "You'll have help with that now," I said. A small pause. "Will I?" I looked at her wrist. The mark was still burning, not fading, not dimming, the way a brand fades when the iron is lifted. Permanent. The old texts had been specific about that. When the seal recognized the bloodline, the mark did not fade. It would be there tomorrow, and in 10 years, and in 40. It was written in the same script as the seal's face, and it meant what it said. I became aware, in the particular way you become aware of things when everything else has gone quiet, that the mark on my own wrist was burning with the same steadiness. The two marks, hers and mine, were separated by the length of the vault, and they burned with the same light. I looked up at her. "The seal has been dark for 400 years, I said. "I know," she said it without apology or pride. "I've been reading about it in the archive." A brief pause. "I had a great deal of time." 400 years, I repeated. 43 women pressed their palms to it 4 years ago. 46 women pressed their palms to it this morning. She waited. "And you walked in through the archive door," I said, "with dust on your arm, and it woke before your hand was fully against the iron." Something in her expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, the private kind, turned inward. "I didn't know it would do that," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I had no idea. I thought it was—" She stopped. "I thought it was a reasonable request, to come and touch the iron. I thought perhaps there was something administrative about it." "There was something administrative about it," I said. "Bren found your name on the ward register at the last hour. You were nearly not here." The suggestion of a smile faded. She looked at the seal. I watched her look at it, this 400-year-old piece of iron that had just announced, in front of my entire council, that this quiet woman in archive clothes was the bloodline it had been waiting for. "I was nearly not here," she repeated quietly. "I nearly wasn't in the hold at all. I came because the archive in Meerford was closing and your archive was advertising for a sorting hand, and She stopped again. A different stopping this time, less composure, more the silence of someone who has just felt the shape of something very large and is not quite ready to name it. "I came for the work," she said. "That's the whole of it. I came for the work." I had governed Valethorn Hold for 10 years. I had made decisions with consequences that ran across decades. I had sat in that vault in the cold hour before dawn and looked at the seal's dark face and told myself I had set down hope, because a man who governs alone cannot afford the weight of it. I looked at this woman who had nearly not been here, who had come for the work, not for the crown, not for the ceremony, not for any of the things that 46 other women had walked into the vault this morning wanting, and something in my chest that had been held very still for a very long time moved. "My counsel is behind me," I said. She glanced past my shoulder. I noticed. "They are on their knees." She looked at them for a moment. Marith, who had served 3 Valethorn lords and had never bent his knee without considerable reason. Counselor Dressed, who was the most formally composed person I had ever known, and was currently kneeling on cold stone with his eyes down. The whole 9 of them, arranged along the northern wall, kneeling without having been told to, because the seal had done it, had told them with silver light what words had failed to confirm for 400 years. Saren looked back at me. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, she said, not with distress, with the honest care of someone who wants to get a thing right. You're not supposed to do anything, I said. That's what I want you to understand first. You're not supposed to perform something or become something or be what anyone has decided you should be. The seal has spoken. My counsel is witnesses. But I paused. You walked in through the archive door this morning because someone finally thought to put your name on a list. You didn't come here for this. No, she agreed, I didn't. So I want to ask you, I said. Not because the asking changes what the seal has shown. I don't think either of us has a great deal of say in that, but because it matters to me that you hear it as a question. I held her gaze. Will you let me name you Luna of Valethorn? She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked down at her wrist. The mark was still burning. Then at the seal, still blazing above its plinth, the silver light steady and warm in the stone chamber, the old script reading itself in light across the walls. Then she looked at me again. You're certain, she said, not a question exactly, more like a word she was turning in her hands to find its weight. The iron has been certain for 400 years, I said. I am only catching up. Something in her face softened then, not performed softness, not the giving in of a woman who has been convinced, but the real thing. A settling. The look of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been offered, very quietly, a place to set it down. Yes, she said, all right. I reached for her hand, the one with the mark, and held it in both of mine. Her fingers were cool from the archive vaults. The mark on her wrist glowed between us, matching the burn on my own. Behind me, I heard Marith's voice, low and formal, beginning the words of the ancient naming. I did not look back. I kept my eyes on her face, this woman who had come for the work, who had come through the archive door, who had walked into a trial she had not been told to hope for and pressed her palm to 4 centuries of cold iron without ceremony, without performance, and woken it. The seal's light was still singing in the stone. I held her hand and listened to it. The weeks that followed were not quiet, but they were ordered, which in Valethorn Hold had always passed for the same thing. My council rose from their knees and spent the rest of that first day in a state of efficient, focused astonishment. They had spent a decade drafting the arrangements that would follow failure. They had not drafted the arrangements that followed success, which meant they had to invent them, and experienced political minds inventing things at speed produce a great deal of parchment and a great deal of noise. I left them to it. What I did not leave was Saren. Not in the way that would have alarmed her. She had enough of the practical in her to require time to think, and I had enough of the governed in me to recognize that pressing her into the ceremonies and the council and the formalities before she had her footing would have been a kind of cruelty dressed as eagerness. I did not want to be eager at her. I wanted to be useful. On the first afternoon, I sent Bren to tell her she was not required to be anywhere until she was ready, and that the archive vaults would remain available to her. She sent word back, via Bren, that she had a lot of the Western land records left, and she would appreciate the morning. It was the correct answer, for reasons I could not entirely have explained. It told me she was not going to lose herself in the weight of what had happened, that she was going to need the work the way some people need the cold, as a thing that makes the mind exact. I understood that. I had been doing it for 10 years. On the second morning, I found her in the vaults. She was at the long table in the Western Archive room, and she had organized the land records into what appeared to be a very thorough system. Sorted first by territory, then by date, then by some third category I could not immediately identify, with small handwritten labels on each stack. She was cross-referencing something when I came in, moving between 2 documents with a focused efficiency that I recognized as the particular concentration of a person who is trying very hard not to think about what is happening in their peripheral life. She looked up when she heard me. "The boundary records," she said, as if we had been mid-conversation. "For the Ashmore territory, the ones from 400 years ago, they use a different notation for water rights than the current system. I've been trying to decide whether to translate them or just annotate them. Translation would make them easier to use, but annotation would preserve the original meaning more accurately." I sat down across from her. "What does your instinct say?" I asked. She looked at the records. "Annotate, but that will take longer." "Then annotate, the accuracy matters." She looked at me then, really looked, the way she had looked at me in the vault, with the honest, unperforming directness that I had come to identify as the truest thing about her. "You came to the archive," she said. "I did. Was there something you needed?" "Yes," I said. "I wanted to see how you were." She put down the document she was holding. She placed it with care. Everything she did was careful, in the way of someone who has learned that carelessness costs more than it should, and folded her hands on the table. "I'm all right," she said. "I've been thinking." "What have you been thinking about?" A pause. "How strange it is that I came for the work." She looked at the organized stacks of records around her. "I've spent my whole life going where the work was. Whatever place had something that needed doing that I could do. That's the whole of my history, really. Not a lineage document, not an elder to nominate me, just, here is a thing I can do and here I am." She looked up. "I didn't know there was a bloodline in me. I had no idea. I had no mark before yesterday, no wolf, no nothing. Just the ability to sort records, and the sense that a good annotation is better than a bad translation." "The ancient texts," I said, "describe the Luna bloodline as latent. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make the carrier exceptional in any obvious way. It waits." 400 years, she said quietly. 400 years. She was silent for a moment. Then, "That is a very long wait." "It is," I agreed. Something shifted in her expression, the careful composure moving slightly to one side, allowing something more unguarded. "And you," she said, "you've been governing alone for 10 years. You've watched 43 women and then 46 more press their hands to that iron and feel nothing." "Yes." "What did you do when it stayed dark?" I thought about it. "I governed," I said. "I kept the hold running and the alliances as steady as they could be kept, and the archive current and the roads clear. I did the work that needed doing." She looked at me. "We both did the same thing," I said. "We did," she said, and the almost smile was back, and this time it went further. It became an actual smile, quiet, a little rueful, and entirely her own. "The work, that's all either of us knew how to do." "It isn't the worst foundation," I said. She looked down at her wrist. The Luna mark was visible above the edge of her sleeve. She had not covered it, and I noticed she had not tried to. "No," she said, "I don't think it is." She met the council on the third day, and she met them as herself, which was the best possible thing she could have done. She did not perform authority. She did not produce the formal composure that the council expected from a Luna elect. She came to the chamber in the same practical gray that she wore in the archive, sat in the chair I had placed for her at the table's left end, and listened to each council member present their matter with the focused attention of someone who genuinely intends to understand what they are hearing. Marith, who was the most formal and experienced of them and who I had feared would find her lacking in some way without intending to be unkind, watched her listen through 2 long presentations and then said, when she turned to him, "You have a question." "I do," she said. "The water rights notation in the old boundary records, the Ashmore ones, from 400 years ago. The current system measures from the channel's edge, but the old notation seems to measure from the seasonal flood line. Does the current law follow the channel or the flood line?" Marith stared at her. Because if it's the flood line, she said, and the channel has shifted since then, which I think it has, based on the later surveys, then there are 3 boundary claims in the Ashmore territory that may be using a misread of the old records. It could be the source of the Eastern Ashmore dispute. Marith turned to Drest. Drest turned to Marith. We've been arguing that dispute for 8 years, Drest said. I know, she said. I've been reading the records. She had been reading the records for 3 months. She had read everything in the Western Archive room, and apparently a great deal else, because she had had the time and the inclination and the particular quality of attention that finds things worth finding. Over the next hour she identified 2 other long-standing administrative questions, not dramatically, not performing expertise, but with the patient specificity of someone going through a task that needed doing. When she was done, and the council had a great deal of new material to review, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me. I looked at her. Was that useful? She asked, in a tone that made it clear she was asking a genuine question, not fishing for confirmation. Considerably, I said. She nodded once, and turned back to the council to hear whatever came next. The council, to a person, looked as if they were making rapid internal revisions to a document they had already written. The naming ceremony was held at the end of the first week. I had asked her whether she wanted it to be large or small. She had thought about it seriously and said, "The seal is in the vault. It seems right to do it there." So it was in the vault, not the whole court, not the Northern Alliance dignitaries, not a spectacle. My council, the senior PAC representatives, the archive staff, and the woman who had come through the archive door 7 days ago and pressed her hand to 4 centuries of cold iron. She wore blue. Not formal ceremony blue, her own blue, a dress she had apparently brought with her from Meerford, well-made and plain, the kind of thing worn by a woman who takes care of what she owns. She stood at the center of the vault with the seal burning above its plinth behind her. It had not gone dark since she had touched it, and she looked entirely like herself. Marith read the words. They were very old words, the Veilthorn naming right, and they had not been read in 400 years, and he read them with the precise care of a man who has been waiting his whole career to say something that mattered. When the words were finished, I held her left hand and turned it so the Luna mark was visible to the council, to the PAC representatives, to the archive staff who had known her as the woman sorting records in Vault 3. And then I said what was true, that she was the faded Luna of Veilthorn, that the bloodline the seal had waited 400 years to recognize was hers, that she had come to this hold to do the work that needed doing and had, in doing it, done something none of us had managed in a century of trying, and that it was my honor, for whatever years remained to me, to be the king standing beside her. She looked at me while I said it. She had the look of someone receiving something precious that they had not expected, held carefully, close to the chest, not showy about it but not dismissing it either. When the council and the representatives and the archive staff placed their hands to their hearts and bowed slowly, without being told to, because the seal's light made it feel right and necessary. She looked at them for a moment with an expression that I thought, watching her, was the specific expression of someone who is not sure they deserve a thing, but is beginning, tentatively, to believe it might be real. Then she looked at me. "The Western Land Records," she said quietly, while the bow was still ongoing around us. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to keep working on them. I'd like to finish what I started." "I would expect nothing less," I said. The almost smile, the full one, her hand in mine, the Luna mark warm between our wrists, the seal burning steady above us both. She did finish the Western Land Records. It took her until mid-autumn, working in the mornings before the council sessions began. She annotated rather than translated, as her instinct had told her to, and the annotations were so thorough that Marith had them bound into their own volume and placed at the front of the Western Archive, the first new reference text the Veilthorn Archive had added in 30 years. She put her name on the spine without ceremony, the way she did most things, because it was accurate and because accuracy mattered. The Ashmore boundary dispute was resolved by the second month, using her reading of the Bloodline notation. 8 years of argument, settled by a woman who had read the original records instead of the summaries. The Eastern Ashmore families sent a delegation to thank her. She received them in the archive because she was working, and she told them to thank the record keepers who had preserved the originals, because it was the records that had held the answer. I stood in the archive doorway and watched her say it. There are moments in a life that a man carries as clear-lit as a lamp. Not the grand ones, not the ceremonies, not the occasions where the world assembles to watch something significant happen. The small ones, the specific ones. The woman at the long table, in the practical gray, making sure the delegation understood that the credit went to the records. I had looked at the seal's dark face in the cold hour before dawn and told myself I had set down hope. I had been wrong, it turned out. I had only set down the performing of it. The hope itself had stayed, folded small, in the way that things we cannot afford stay when we cannot afford to carry them openly, tucked away, waiting for the moment it became safe to be what it was. She was the moment. She had come through the archive door with dust on her arm and pressed her palm to 4 centuries of cold iron, and the iron had said, "Yes, this one, at last." I had spent 10 years learning to govern without a Luna. I had done it well, I thought, kept the hold running, kept the roads clear, kept the alliances as steady as they could be kept. But there is a difference between governing well and governing whole, and I had not understood what that difference felt like until she sat across from me at a long table and asked whether to translate or annotate. The difference felt like the seal's light, like something that had been waiting so long it had forgotten what it was waiting for, and then remembered all at once, with the clarity of silver burning through stone. On a morning in late autumn, when the light came through the archive's high windows at the specific angle that turned the dust motes to gold, she looked up from the last stack of the Western records and said, "I'm done." She set the final annotated volume to the side and looked at it for a moment. The way you look at a completed thing, to confirm it is what you intended. Then she looked at me. I was at the table's other end with the trade correspondence, because the council sessions did not begin until second bell, and we had both formed the habit of working in the archive in the hours before. "The records are done," she said. "I know. All of them, the whole Western series." "I know," I said. "I've been watching you work through them." She folded her hands on the table. "What comes next?" I set down the trade correspondence. "There are the Northern Land records," I said. "They haven't been touched in 60 years. The notation system is different, earlier than the Western series, closer to the Bloodline style you worked out in the Ashmore documents. I'd want you to approach them the same way." She looked at me. "And there is the rest of it," I said. "The council and the alliance and the Northern correspondence and the running of this hold, all of that. But the Northern records first, I think, because they are the thing that needs doing, and you are the person who does what needs doing." "I am," she said. She said it without pride or performance, the way you state a fact that you have verified and are no longer uncertain about. The same quiet certainty she had brought to the Bloodline notation, the same honest directness she had brought to the council chamber, the same composure she had carried through a vault full of silver light and an astonished council on their knees. She pulled the first volume of the Northern records toward her. I watched her open it. Outside the archive windows, the autumn light was making the courtyard stone the color of old iron, warm and plain and permanent. The seal was burning in the vault 2 floors below us, the way it had burned without pause since she had pressed her palm to it in the morning light, while 46 women's careful silences still lived in the stone around it. She found the first unfamiliar notation and made a small sound, not frustration, just recognition, and reached for her pen. I went back to the trade correspondence. We worked. The hall was warm. The light was good. The records were vast and needed doing, and she was the woman who had come for the work, and I was the king who had spent 10 years learning what it cost to govern without the person the iron had been waiting for. She was here now. The iron knew it. The stone knew it. The mark on my wrist burned with the quiet, permanent warmth of a thing that has finally arrived at what it was always meant to be. I picked up my pen. We worked.